story about drugs in Hawaii. Anything that you can imagine in the late 90s, early 2000s. This is going to tell you about my journey through that. Check this out. And I don't know, not everybody's going to be happy that I'm telling this story. Maybe it should be told. Let's tell you a little bit about myself.
Be blasé about some things, Rose, but not about Titanic.
This is the ship they say is unsinkable.
It is unsinkable. God himself could not sink this ship.
Hey, welcome back, guys. Part 3. So let's get everyone caught up. Basically, what I explained to everyone was that I was the manager at a local pizza place where you'd order pizzas. It's a normal franchise, like, you know, everybody knows the name. But we delivered pizzas to the Waikiki area. Now, the Waikiki area in Hawaii is like, it's the main strip on Oahu. And there are a lot of nightclubs, a lot of bars. It's very, very busy on the weekends. And that's where everybody goes to have fun. So, you know, you would see everybody there, okay? So if I'm managing this pizza joint, and we would deliver these pizzas, you know, all over Waikiki. Well, towards the end of the night, I decided that leftover pizzas that I had, I would basically give them away to the nightclubs that I was going to go to that night. That was going to ensure that I was getting it for free. Now, you can go back and you can watch the other 2 videos, and it's going to tell you all of this. But I'm just trying to get those of you that haven't seen those yet caught up a little bit. I do recommend going back and watching the other videos, because there's some things in there that's going to explain, you know, step-by-step process of how I got into dealing drugs. But the gist of it was that once I started going to these nightclubs, I started meeting all these people and becoming part of this, you know, scene, that I was able to make a lot of friends and contacts. And I've talked about this in the other 2 videos where I explained that, you know, I was networking. But I want to make it clear that I was not, this was not my goal to network so that later on I could become a drug dealer. At the time, all I was doing was being me. And that was just my personality. My personality has always been to, you know, meet everybody. And then, you know, I remember details about people, and, you know, and this person might be looking for this person in the future. And I, you know, it was just my personality to butterfly around to all these people. So one thing led to another. I got offered a job as an intern at a radio station, and I jumped on it. And then, make a long story short, I basically started dealing drugs shortly after that, because of some of my friends that I met at the radio station and at the nightclubs. And they were doing drugs, you know. It wasn't like we weren't banging heroin or, you know, even smoking ice, which was big in Hawaii at the time. But what we were doing was more like ecstasy or smoking marijuana, weed. Yeah. So it's kind of like a social drug. It's really what we stuck with. And I, you know, blew up really fast. It blew up crazy fast in the nightclub scene. You know, I was a young guy, 22 years old, and it was late 90s. It was, you know, just the right timing for all of this, for me to get involved in. It wasn't long before, in this time frame, you know, we had the movie Titanic come out, and there was boy bands out, and there was all this, you know, it was just a really good time at the time to be me, you know, because, you know, I kind of fit that persona, and especially over in the islands, you know, where, you know, there wasn't a ton of people that looked like me. So that kind of helped with the being able to meet people, and the radio station really helped there too, because it introduced me to all of these people. Shortly after starting to deal drugs, I obviously I didn't need to work anymore. I quit my job and started just hanging out with all the guys from the radio station and the nightclubs that I would meet. And then really just all I did was deal drugs. I'd go to all the nightclubs, I'd get in for free. I would, just party all the time, and that's all this was about. So through that car club that I, kind of hung around, and we did a lot of events with them through the radio station, and a lot of the nightclub events that I would go to was with this car club too. So through them, through some other contacts, I was always able to have almost an endless supply of ecstasy, and I was always able to get rid of it really, really fast. And during this time, I'd meet multiple celebrities that would come in, interview at the radio station, and then when they would leave, sometimes they'd ask, like the DJs or people that were around them, hey, do you know anybody on the island that has weed? Do you know anyone on the island that has ecstasy? And of course they did, they knew me. So I had sold ecstasy to a pretty popular DJ from MTV and a host from MTV at the same time. I had sold weed to several big hip-hop and R&B bands, and it was just, I was so numb to it at this point, because I'd already been in this scene long enough to not get starstruck any longer. So in the last video, I told you that basically my next step was finding, how to get closer to the source. The closer you get to the source, the more money you're gonna make. And then, of course, you have to be able to unload this bigger quantity of drugs. So I never thought that there was a situation where I could not figure out a way to make things work. Never did. Never crossed my mind. And I think that later on, as the story develops, and you're going to see that a lot of people took advantage of that, because most people believed at the time that if I wanted to get something done, it was going to happen. So that was definitely my personality then. It's still kind of my personality, but as a young 22-year-old, I always exuded this massive amount of confidence, and was very secure with, if I made a decision, I was going to be able to do it. So at one point, I decided I was going to have to find probably somebody in the mainland. So back in the 90s, early 2000s, probably still going on to this day, there's a huge markup from what something costs you in LA to what it costs you once you get it to Hawaii. I mean, the amount of markup is ridiculous. For example, you could get a kilo of cocaine in LA back then, or at least when I started getting more involved into that type of thing, you could get it for anywhere between $10,000, and that kilo of cocaine would go for, sorry, it's my cat. This is Tico. That kilo of cocaine would go for about $1,000 an ounce in Hawaii at the time. So a kilo of cocaine is 2.2 pounds, right? So it was roughly about 36 ounces. So for what you could buy for $5,000, or $8,000, or even if it was 10. If you could get it to Hawaii, it was $36,000, and it was gone like that. So that's the trick, right? You have to find somebody in LA who has, at the time, like I said, this was ecstasy. So I was getting ecstasy anywhere from about $10 a pill to $13 a pill, right around this time frame. Okay, so that was giving me anywhere from as much as $20 profit per pill, and as little as $5 or $6 profit per pill. So depending on if I was wholesaling out or if I was selling individually. I had enough people individually that, at any time I could have just did that, and I could have very easily made $1,000, $2,000 a day, and not have to worry about getting to that next level. But that was my goal, was to get to that next level. I was always trying to find more. So it kind of fell in my lap how I found a contact in the mainland. Kind of fell in my lap. Basically, I had drawn some attention. It wasn't just the guys at the radio station. It wasn't just the car club groups and all the different, friends that I made throughout all these different nightclubs. Because there was a ton of nightclubs. I mean, a ton. You had Venus, Eurasia, you had The Wave, you had Rock Cellar, you had, it was just so many nightclubs all over the island. And we went to basically all of them. There were several promotions ran by radio stations, and it might be Tuesday nights here, Friday nights here, Saturday nights there. So you would go to these different nightclubs, and at each and every one of them, I met my own contacts there. Whether it be the bartenders, the DJs, the waiters, the waitresses, the people that frequented those clubs. So at this point, I was pretty successful in dealing ecstasy, and I sold weed, 2-3 pounds here and there, and I was making plenty of money. So at the time, I was driving a little Porsche. I had a Porsche 911, 1980. It probably only had like 20,000 miles on it. It was just a sweet little car. It was the same Porsche that was in risky business, and I drove this car around. I was really flashy. I had these diamond watches and diamond bracelets, and had all these bright clothes that I was wearing. Like I said, it was time of the boy bands, so I took advantage of it. And here I am going to the various strip clubs, various nightclubs, and I constantly bump into this huge group of Samoans. So this is when it starts to get deep. Here's the thing, guys. When you're dealing with ecstasy, and you're the guy that had ecstasy in the late 90s, early 2000s, everybody liked you. They all did. Everybody liked you. And at the time, it was just one of those things where, it was a party drug. And so there's totally different scenes when you're dealing with a party drug with ecstasy and some weed. It's going into the other stuff, like heroin, ice, cocaine, crack. When you start getting into that stuff, that's when you're dealing with a whole different group of people. So this group that I met was part of that. They were part of this group, whereas I was doing this thing. Now they liked this stuff, so they liked me. And I was never ever did I feel like I was in a situation where they were going to try to move in on me. At least not yet. This group of Samoans, they also had a record label. Some of you guys are gonna guess. You're gonna think you know who it is. Late 90s, early 2000s. If you think you know who it is, you probably know who it is. All right, they were a very popular record label, and they had some really good music being played all over the radios. And that's how I kind of met these guys, because I was at the radio station, not just hanging out in the clubs, but I seen them everywhere. They would pull up in, 8 or 9 vehicles deep, big, monstrous Samoans. These are big boys, okay? And every time they seen me, they would call me one of two names. They would call me Leo, or they would call me Titanic, because that's what they associated me with. It was the movie Titanic. These guys wanted my ecstasy. Simple. You know, they liked me, thought I was this cool kid, and they liked ecstasy. So I'd sell them ecstasy. And you know, they were pretty cool guys, you know. If you've ever been around somebody that's really, really big, and they've grown up really big, you know, these big, monstrous guys, a lot of times they're some of the nicest guys you will ever meet, because they grew up recognizing their size versus everyone else, and they're considerate of that. Or a lot of times that's what happens. So a lot of times you get these really big, fearsome looking guys, these great personalities. Now, to me, they had great personalities, and I really liked these guys. I really did. I had one guy in particular that was part of this group, and he actually wasn't Samoan, but he was really, really close to all these guys, and very connected into it, because he really dove into drug dealing, and that was the other side of this group. They were really big into drug dealing on the islands, but they were in that other group, right? So this guy that he kind of treated me like I was a little brother, just latched on to me. He was always super cool to me. We had some of the same friends in the nightclubs, and we were pretty close. So the guy's name, I'm just gonna start using first names, okay? I'm going to try and keep most of the names out of, I hope I don't catch any of you guys off guard, and I don't want anybody to be upset. But this guy Mike was a really good friend of mine, and he, was from an outer island. These group of Samoans really liked the guy, and he was basically their person that was bringing drugs in, and then he would fan all these drugs out to all these different, basically like lieutenants in this group. So basically this group was set up kind of like the Italian mafia, and they were basically a syndicate or a mafia. They really were. They had the hierarchy, they had the lieutenants, they had their soldiers, they had guys, that was out there pushing drugs, they had guys that were enforcers. It was really, really an intimidating group, and nobody messed with these guys, ever. So this guy Mike comes up with a proposition for me. He says, hey man, if I gave you cash, could I invest in ecstasy with you? Everybody was starting to recognize that ecstasy was constantly being sold out. And I told him, yeah, we could probably do that. So this gets dangerous, because now I've got somebody in a really big group syndicate that is wanting to invest money with me, what does that mean? Does that mean that I'm going to owe this guy? And in essence, owe this group? Does that mean that I'm going to work for them? What does this mean? I didn't want to work for anyone. I was so happy with doing my own thing and just partying because I was young, and just hanging out, spending all this time in the clubs. I didn't want to work for somebody, and I really didn't want to get involved in this organized crime stuff. But he started throwing money at me, and I took advantage of it. So there was one other reason why I decided that I would do this, that I would get involved with this group. One was that one day I happened to be out and I ran into one of these lieutenants. This guy was really well known, guys. I'm telling you, he was really well known, and he was a big guy, and he was definitely not somebody you wanted on your bad side. And he actually was pretty high up in Samoan society. His family was pretty close to royalty. And this guy came up to me and he said, "Hey, I want you to work for me." And, and I talked to this guy several times, but I didn't want to work for anyone. So when he asked me to work for him, I knew that meant that basically he was going to own me, and that everything I made, I was going to have to give kickbacks and start paying this guy money and basically start answering to him. And that was a pretty scary proposition because I didn't know where that would lead, and I was not really into spending a lot of time with this guy because it was kind of intimidating to me at the time. Keep in mind, guys, I was a 22-year-old kid, a white kid from the Midwest. I had no business doing any of this. So what I did is I got a hold of the guy Mike, and I told him about this conversation. And he said, "Hey, don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. I'll get a hold of him. I'll let him know you're with me." So apparently I was with Mike, and it worked. At that point, the only other person that I really dealt with, other than Mike, in this group, was going to later on be the head of this group. So that was, quite a bit later. That was after I was more involved. And it gets a little crazy. So I agreed to work with Mike on purchasing big quantities somewhere in the mainland of ecstasy. And then we were going to team up and outsource all this ecstasy. And there was going to be a lot of money involved. So you're going to want to hear this next part, because this is a crazy adventure, what happens next. So I'll go into that on the next video. If you guys haven't watched the first two videos, please go back and watch it. And then I'll see you on the next one. Thank you.